Hello everybody, and greetings from rainy Finland, and welcome to today's Firstbeat webinar with an interesting topic that most of us are involved in on a daily basis, both personally and professionally. Work-life integration, how to maintain focus and energy in a volatile world. Today we are broadcasting from the Firstbeat office in Jyväskylä, Finland, with our guest speaker Simon Shepherd joining in from London. My name is Tiina Hoffman and I'm an exercise physiologist here at Firstbeat, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. I would also like to say happy Thanksgiving to our few American listeners. Unfortunately, we realized too late that the webinar had been scheduled for this big American holiday, but hopefully those who couldn't join us today will be able to listen to the podcast afterwards. During the webinar today, you can ask questions by writing them in the chat window, and I will read them out for Simon to answer at the end of the session. If you don't have time to answer all the questions, we will send them answers to you via email in the next couple of days. If you want to learn more details about the Firstbeat Lifestyle Assessment method as a tool for wellness professionals and in corporate wellness, you can visit our website's Wellness Services section, and you can also find some of our previous webinar podcasts on our website on a number of different topics. But now I would like to introduce today's guest speaker, Simon Shepherd. He's a chartered physiotherapist by profession and has worked in professional sport, for example, rugby, football, and cricket since 1991. In 2008, he co-founded Optima Life, a London-based company that specializes in combining technology and coaching to help individuals and organizations to become more resilient and productive. Simon has extensive experience in delivering talks to businesses globally on the topics of health, performance, and leadership. Firstbeat has had the pleasure to work closely together with Simon and Optima Life for almost 8 years now. So welcome, Simon. You can take it from here.
Many thanks, Tina, and hello, and thank you to those who are listening to this webinar. I think it's going to be a webinar which is likely to pose more questions than answers, but I hope that it will be one that encourages you to think about you. So let's kick off with a question for you. How fair are you being to yourself? How fair is your business being to you? And how fair are you being to your business? Well, to help you maybe answer that and navigate your thoughts, I pulled together a few ideas and findings based on the work that Optima Life has been delivering to companies over the past 5 years. And we've put these under the title of work-life integration, how to maintain focus in a volatile world. And I use the phrase work-life integration quite deliberately because I wonder if work-life balance is a bit passé. It's a phrase that's probably now a dream. It's a phrase that potentially could be an outcome, but work-life integration is a skill, and it's a skill that's something that people really need to think a bit about in a world where employees are demanding more and more of their employees. If I asked you to think about the capacity that you're being asked to work under or the productivity demands, most people are sort of thinking that they're pushed to 100% day in, day out. Not many people get to the end of the day and think, gee, I've got another hour left at work. What shall I do now? There's always more to do. So we've been asked to work at 100, 110, 120% capacity. But I guess the flip side of that is if we've been asked to work at that capacity, what support are employees giving to their staff so that they can achieve that in a sustainable fashion? And indeed, what support are employees giving to themselves so that they can sustain both an active life at work and a purposeful life away from it in a sustainable fashion? If we don't do this, it's a bit like a Formula One car that's been asked to win a race with half a tank of petrol and one set of tyres. As the support diminishes, the results will be eradicated. And we've been asked to do this in a world that is changing massively. I've used the word volatile in this title slide. Some people may well be familiar with this phrase VUCA, because apparently we live in a VUCA world now. We've moved on from living in a Barbie world. We now live in a VUCA world. VUCA, volatile, may be demonstrated in the top left by war and conflict in Aleppo. Uncertain, maybe bottom left in whatever Mr. Trump decides to do. Complex, top right. Who on earth would have thought Leicester City would have won the English Premier League 12 months ago? And ambiguous. I mean, what on earth is going to happen around Brexit? I'm not even sure Mystic Meg will know. And if those of you who don't know who Mystic Meg is, she's probably the UK's leading person when it comes to influencing the future. So we live in this VUCA world, and I'm not sure there are any real signs of these four things changing or dissipating. This is a world that we have created, and this is the world that we have to function in. It is a world where things are changing incredibly quickly, and time flies by. As time flies by, that's an interesting phrase, because does time really fly by? We often use that expression, but it doesn't really. I think in my lifetime, there are always going to be 24 hours in a day. I think there are always going to be 60 minutes in an hour. There are always going to be 60 seconds in a minute. Actually, time is one of the few constants that we have left. What we really need to think about is what we do within the time. What do we do within that constant? The world of work has changed in this sort of concept of time over the last probably 40 years. The world of starting work at 9, finishing at 5, or I think it's 8 to 4 if you're from Finland, is definitely changing. People are working very flexible hours. That's partly a generational shift. And we've now got globalization of economies, which means that some people have to really be alert for 36 hours in a 24-hour period. It sounds crazy, but that's what the time clock does to us. So a real challenge is if we're putting so much demand on what we do within our constant, i.e. time, how do we create sustainable energy, and how do we create sustainable focus? Before I go any further, I just want to start with a quote, and we're going to try and show you a film, but just the quote. It comes from a chap called Earl Nightingale. Earl Nightingale was a radio presenter, who started off in the 50s, and by the 70s he had the most highly syndicated radio program in the world, and that program was called Our Changing World. Not a title that would be out of place today. And Earl Nightingale said, the driving force of a career must come from the individual. Remember, jobs are owned by the company. You own your career. I'll come back to that little quote from Earl Nightingale in a bit. Let's have a look at this film. Hopefully this will work on most people's media players. This is just a little extract from a TED talk given by the Dutch primatologist Frans de Waal, and I think it makes a point really nicely. So can we get the film playing, please?
So a final experiment that I want to mention to you is our fairness study. And so this became a very famous study, and there's now many more, because after we did this about 10 years ago, it became very well known. And we did that originally with capuchin monkeys, and I'm going to show you the first experiment that we did. It has now been done with dogs, and with birds, and with chimpanzees, but with Sarah Brosnan we started out with capuchin monkeys. So what we did is we put two capuchin monkeys side by side. Again, these animals, they live in a group. They know each other. We take them out of the group, put them in a test chamber. And there's a very simple task that they need to do. And if you give both of them cucumber for the task, the two monkeys side by side, they're perfectly willing to do this 25 times in a row. So cucumber, even though it's really only water in my opinion, but cucumber is perfectly fine for them. Now, if you give the partner grapes, the food preferences of my capuchin monkeys correspond exactly with the prices in the supermarket. And so if you give them grapes, that's a far better food, then you create inequity between them. So that's the experiment we did. Recently, we videotaped it with new monkeys who had never done the task, thinking that maybe they would have a stronger reaction, and that turned out to be right. The one on the left is the monkey who gets cucumber. The one on the right is the one who gets grapes. The one who gets cucumber, note that the first piece of cucumber is perfectly fine. The first piece she eats. Then she sees the other one getting grape, and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber, and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests the rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again. So this is basically the Wall Street protest that you see here.
Thank you for controlling the film, Anina. So I think that film shows quite nicely why fairness is such an important factor. Of course, the human brain has a much more developed frontal cortex. We're able to rationalize unfairness. But when we become fatigued or when we become stressed, of course, our cortex doesn't come into play quite so much. And that's why it's important to recognize those two factors, fatigue and stress, if we want to be fair to ourselves. So what I'm going to try and cover off over the sort of next 10 minutes or so is four or five things that begin with the letter R. It's a bit like Sesame Street. This webinar is brought to you by the letter R. Resilience, robustness, recognition, recharge, and responsibility. And I want you to think how those are important in your fairness system. So let's think of resilience. It's a word that's used a lot. There are a lot of businesses that are asking for resilience programs that we run resilience programs for. But what is resilience? Well, if we're being very physical, you've got that definition at the top. It's the ability of a substance or an object to spring back into shape. Probably something that's a little bit more apt is the capability to recover quickly from difficulties. I quite like that phrase, performing at your best regardless of whatever direction you're pulled in, whatever's been thrown at you, whatever cock up you've just made, whatever challenge has just been laid in front of you. You've got that ability to perform at your best regardless of. A couple of things I always like to say about resilience. Everyone thinks resilience is to do with change in the world and change in the situation around them. And I think we must always remember that resilience is a two-way street. And just to demonstrate that, I'm just going to sort of talk you through the story of the glass of water. And it's a story that features my son, who when he was growing up was quite clumsy. You know, we used to sit down for dinner and he would often spill his glass of water. And you know, most evenings I'd be absolutely cool with this. I'd go, hey, don't worry, that's not a problem. I'd take his glass, I'd go and get a cloth, I'd mop up the mess, I'd fill the glass up, we'd all sit down and have a fantastic dinner. But occasionally my reaction was different, and the only thing that had changed there was me, because this sort of thing happened at the same time, in the same place, with the same people. I was the only thing that really had changed. So please do remember, resilience is a two-way interaction. It isn't just everything changing around you and how you deal with it. It's you changing in that situation too. For me, resilience revolves around these things. It's about recognition. Once we recognize where we're at, we can reframe, we can relearn, or we can release. We then need to reset. And ultimately, we've got to respond and react. But it always has to start with recognition. The other point I want to make about resilience is there's a big difference between resilience and robustness. Often people just aim for strength. Well, you know, strength is great, but robust people can break. And when a robust person breaks, they tend to break big. It tends to be quite serious. So if you're the sort of person who feels that you can absorb loads and loads and loads and loads and loads, and you start noticing the slightest chink in your armor, or if you work with someone who can take loads and loads and loads and loads, and you notice the slightest chink in their armor, you know, that's probably a time to act, because as I said before, if the robust person breaks, they are likely to break big. And the thing that challenges our resilience or robustness in the world is often this thing, stress, something that's becoming or seemingly becoming epidemic across business populations around the world. And an understanding of stress is really critical. And for me, an understanding of stress at an individual level has to start with recognition. How good are people at looking at themselves? Do we always really see in depth what we're looking at? So here's just a little slide for you to read through. I'll just give you a minute just to read through this text, if that's okay. So I'm sure most of you have made total sense of that, and you know, with a magazine article or a book, probably totally happy to try and understand things with that cursory glance. But when we're looking at human beings, when we're looking at human beings' health, when we're looking at people's well-being, is it okay just to have that cursory glance? I'm not sure it is, and that's probably why I fell in love with Firstbeat when I first saw it, because it did give me that depth of vision. It was like the camera on the shoulder that allowed me to really understand both my own physiological reactions, my coping mechanisms, my resilience, and also as a coach and someone who works in businesses, the peoples I was working with. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with Firstbeat. I suspect most of you use Firstbeat on this webinar, so I'm not going to sort of outline heart rate variability and what it measures, but I'll just show some of the old favorites that I've got from my collection, and I apologize that they are old favorites, but I think they tell some really good stories. This is a businessman on 2 consecutive days, and on day 1 you can see that he's had a tough day at work. He's been to the gym at the beginning of the day here at 10 o'clock. That's a physical load. He's gone to bed just before midnight, straight into recovery. If my days look like that every day, I'd be pretty happy. Maybe I should get a bit more switch off in the middle of the day or at some other points. Tina would tell me, as being the expert coach that she is. The very next day, this person, they still went to bed at the same time. The only recovery they get at 5:30 in the morning through to 6:30. This is the person who went out and took clients out for dinner. Had about 2/3 of a bottle of wine is what they earned up to, ate late, and obviously had mental engagement all day and all evening. So you know, when we look at that person's resilience line, it's try and move on to the next slide. It's a big difference. So on day 1, the batteries have gone down. They do for most of us. That's why we go to bed. We're tired, but the recovery was effective. On day 2, the batteries have gone down and stayed down. Sometimes people make lifestyle choices, and those lifestyle choices, particularly, well, not particularly, typically seem to revolve around the way we exercise and the way we eat. And those are great decisions to make. I think there's some other things we need to look at, and I'll talk about those in a minute. But we don't always get the decisions right, even on the simple stuff. So this was someone who came to see me with back pain. You know, when I was sort of being a physio all the time. And he told me about his back for 20 seconds, and he told me about his life for 20 minutes. So we put a monitor on him because I thought that was probably the most important thing to do, get an understanding of his life. And you can see he was doing hard exercise for about an hour and a quarter just before bedtime. This was a chap who was on a board of one of the banks that collapsed about 7 years ago. And I said to him, hey, what's going on there? That's quite interesting, really. He said, well, it's exercise. You know, I've heard all about exercise. It's this fantastic thing for me. I've gone out and bought a punch bag. So every night I switch off at the end of the day by doing an hour's boxing. Of course, exercise is good for you, but it's also a stimulant. So you can see what happens to this person's sleep after being stimulated from the exercise. So the action was right, but the timing and the dosage was wrong. So sometimes we put in place good strategies, but our execution isn't great. And then this is probably my favorite slide that we've ever done. So we'll just move on one. Yeah, we've ever done. This is a cancer nurse who once a week has to do that really tough clinic. And her perception was that was the most stressful time of her week. And my perception was that's going to be the most stressful time of her week. And this is her doing the clinic, physiologically in a pretty good place. What was also interesting is if we look overnight, she's really struggling. Well, that struggle wasn't a latent effect from the clinic. That struggle was because she was worried about getting her PhD in 6 weeks' time, something she hadn't even thought about being a great drain on her system. So 2 key messages here was, one, we could focus on strategies to help her deal with something that was an issue. And secondly, she could actually leave behind what she thought was really problematic, i.e. the clinic, and reassure her that that wasn't an issue. And the more we've done this with people around the world, the more we see this sort of trace when people are doing actions that are closely aligned with their values. It often shows up physiologically. What I really like about Firstbeat and its usage in the corporate sector is that we can start breaking down barriers between perception and reality. This is quite a typical slide. At the top you can see some data on what people are thinking in terms of, do I do enough physical activity to be healthy? Well, 46% of people did. I think we can see quite clearly down here that there was a bit of a mismatch between that perception and reality. Exercise is an obvious one, but we'll also see some interesting data around sleep. Now, in the UK, we've done quite a bit of this now. I think we're probably getting close to 17,000 days. I think we got over 1.3 billion data points, and with the assistance of Firstbeat, we assessed this earlier this year. You know, we know all sorts of interesting things. You know, we know that Saturday's the toughest day of the week. We know that people who exercise get much better quality sleep, and I can go on. And there's some interesting details around this, which I'm sure we can circulate to the audience if people are interested. But I guess one of the big questions is, so what? You know, so what? Data's great, but it doesn't really do anything unless we use it effectively. So what is really critical in the workspace is using data to initiate a response. And the response, in my view, has to revolve around getting sustainable human beings functioning. The response has to be about controlling capacity and recharging capacity. And the beauty of Firstbeat is that it gives that objective data in a very, very clear way. And the real beauty of Firstbeat is it gives the context for why the data is like it. The way the diary helps open up conversations with people creates the real power in the delivery. And the stories and the context and the narrative are absolutely critical to help understand the complexity of human beings. So just going back to that quote from Earl Nightingale, just to try and bring things together here, you know, I think this is pretty serious stuff. Just if we change the last word on Earl Nightingale's quote, we've got quite a nice little saying there. The driving force for career must come from the individual. Remember, jobs are owned by the company, but you own your life. So if we believe that's important, how much are you thinking about your life? How much time do you spend setting goals for you? You know, my goals for this year are to play 6 games of dad's cricket, stay at the level rugby ref I'm at, make sure I get to all of my daughter's end of term plays. If I do that, it's been a good year. My company's goal will be learning how to write neater on flip charts and maybe speak a little bit more slowly and make sure I pronounce all the T's and R's in words. But it's actually that first list that's really important to me. I know that I can't achieve goals unless I talk to people, because their people will support me in the same way that I hopefully support them. So it's important to encourage people to talk with confidence to their nearest and dearest. It's also important for people to really understand their values. Companies have mission statements, but what's really critically important to you? And you know, I do have a statement that I think helps me this year, which is a very simple mission statement, that for me to be resilient, I want to be respected as a physiotherapist. I want to be respected as a thought leader in my field. I want to work for an organization where no job is too big for the organization and no person in the organization is too big for a job. And my immediate family is the most important thing in my life. And I tell people that a lot, because it, one, keeps me honest and it reminds me what I'm really about. And two, it's critically important that I try and live my life close to that statement, because if I don't, it's unlikely that I'm going to be resilient. It's very likely my resilience will be tested. But if I do live my life close to that statement, there's a chance I'll be okay. Whatever's been thrown at me, whatever direction I'm pulled in, I'm likely to be okay. So I guess the last question I want to ask is, do you spend your whole life as a human doing, or do you allow yourself some time to be a human being? I think maybe the last 20, 30 years with digitization and processes everyone's been pushed towards being a human doing. I think maybe we need to address the balance a little bit and encourage people to be human beings. I guess I should show something where it's been a success. We could have shown a whole host of things here. This is just one individual that I think makes the point quite nicely. This was a global head of risk for a bank who quite clearly was struggling, as you can see from the data here. Not much recovery shown over a 24-hour period. The resilience line right down. This person was interesting. We talked to them and it was clear that they liked exercising. In fact, what they said is, I really love exercising. When do you exercise? Well, I don't really do very much of that anymore. Why not? I don't really know. No, come on, why not? It's just work. I've just been doing too much. And how's work going? Not as well as it could do. Okay, would you like to do something you love? Yeah, I would. Okay. How about managing to exercise 3 times a week? Is that doable? Yeah, I think I could do that. Okay, I'm going to leave now and you're going to email me tomorrow, so I'm going to let you sleep on it, and you're going to tell me that you really do believe it's doable. And I got an email the next day and she said, yeah, it's not only doable, but I've done a session already. This person loved roller skating, and so she took herself off roller skating and she did it on a regular basis, and this was the data 6 weeks later. A much different profile. Obviously, doing some exercise is a very good physiological start, but doing something you love was probably even more important. And it's that responsibility to you that is critical, because without that, your resilience and indeed your Firstbeat data can really be challenged. So, last thought, if change is the new constant, how are you and your organization dealing with it? And I think I'll stop there. So thank you very much. And if there are any questions, I guess they come through Tina.
Yeah, thank you very much, Simon. Really good reflection and food for thought. I like the idea that we need to remember to be human beings. So it's so important for us as professionals to take care of our own resilience as well. And great way to do that, if you're using the lifestyle assessment, periodically put the bodyguard monitor on yourself and just check to see how you are doing, so you can actually help your clients do be more resilient and robust. That's what most of you guys are working with. So really encourage you to remember that. Good reminders from Simon. If you have any questions at all, please write them in the chat window right now and I can read it out. We have a couple of minutes we can do here in the end. While I'm waiting to see if any questions appear there, I can just remind that we'll have the podcast of today's session available in a few days on our website. So if some of you came in late, so you can listen to that on the website. And also we have another webinar coming up this month on next month on December 13th that looks at the population behaviors and lifestyle trends that the Firstbeat database reveals. Simon was referring to that a little bit. And we will be looking at some of the comparisons between what we found from the database that's mostly Finland and European or Scandinavian data, and then also what the UK database showed some interesting lifestyle trends. So be sure to join us on December 13th for that one. That'll be the last one for this year for us. Okay, Simon, so here's one question for you. You gave some great ideas how to do it all right, but if you had to name, just on the spot here, if you had to name your top 2 to 3 strategies how to improve your resilience to make sure that you do have that work-life balance or work-life integration right, so what would be your top 2 to 3 picks?
I think understanding what's really important to you, so I think that would be number 1. And I think wherever possible, working with people or, in an organization where there's a strong match in values is useful. So those are 2 things. And hey, can't beat a bit of exercise every now and again too. So there you go. There's 3, Tina.
All right, great. Thank you. Okay, so here's another one that I imagine you'll be able to say something to this and maybe then get in touch with the person who is asking the question afterwards, but he's asking, can you say some good example or program in a company that could be followed regarding resilience?
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of examples of companies that are doing this. I mean, I can just give 2 or 3 examples of organizations we've worked with. So probably some of our biggest clients would be those who work in the health sector. So the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK. We do a lot of work with staff to help them with their resilience. We've done quite a bit in the motor sector where we run a 4-day course for leadership around the world, entitled Health and Leadership, which I think is groundbreaking in what it's trying to do. In terms of an example of a standard program for resilience, I think that's very, very tough, because one of the things we would always try and do is in the Optimal Life philosophy is encourage people to think about themselves individually and encourage them to get excited about the diverse nature of human beings. And there's a phrase that we have in this country, which is an apple a day keeps the doctor away. And the trouble of that is an apple a day doesn't keep the doctor away if you're allergic to apples. And yet we still tell people to do the same thing. So if you're looking for an example of a resilience program that's successful, I think it's one that doesn't try and tell people what to do. It's one that gives people choices and encourages them to think of multifaceted ingredients that allows them to put together their own personal resilience recipe. And that's certainly something that we try and do at Optimal Life.
Yeah, thank you. That's an old Finnish saying, I'm sure, that eat an apple a day to keep the doctor away. I'm sure. But thank you for the participants for taking part in today's webinar, and thank you for the questions. And if you have any more information you would like to know, you can certainly contact Simon directly to ask him about his program. And of course, you can find us here at Firstbeat if you have some lifestyle assessment related questions as well. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Goodbye.
Bye.